Welcome to the Commerce Tomorrow podcast, your one stop to learn about the technology that's powering the future of commerce. Here are your hosts, Dirk and Kelly.
Welcome to another Commerce Tomorrow podcast. We're pleased to be joined by Jeremy Miyares. He is Chief Digital Officer of Lion Capital. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Great to have you here. So, Jeremy, you are currently SVP Digital at Lion Capital, but you also have not a very interesting present, but also a very interesting past for everybody that's listening in, because you had been the former VP Digital Commerce at Burberry. So maybe why don't you first introduce yourself? Who are you? What are you doing now? Where are you coming from? And so on.
Yeah, happy to. Today I'm actually based out in LA. I've been here for about 3 years, working for Lion Capital, which is a private equity company focusing on consumer brands. We invested in a number of household names that you may know. Jimmy Choo was one of our famous ones from some time ago. American Apparel. Currently, we're invested in All Saints, John Varvatos, Alex and Annie, Hurricane MD, Paige Denim, and a number of others across the US and Europe. And really, my role when I joined 3 years ago, when I spoke to the founder of the organization, he was really, as we're really focused on consumer, he was really acutely aware of the changes that were happening across all of the portfolio and the industry when it comes to digital e-commerce, but digital more broadly and technology. And he spoke to me and he wanted me to come in and do three things really. But first was to come and support the deal team as we look at new acquisitions and potential new deals, and just try and lean in a little bit there, and then some expertise in e-commerce, digital marketing, and technology. Secondly, to try to spend time across selected brands within the portfolio to help with the digital transformation within those brands. That would be strategy, organization, and really the operating side of the business. And I spend, probably 70% of my time doing that. And then the last piece of it is really working directly within the PE firm, and working with the guys here and with the leadership team here, and helping sort of build our own knowledge of digital and e-commerce and trends. That's been a really interesting part of the role as well. Really helping, guys within the sort of traditional PE industry. They're obviously incredibly smart guys, really helping them understand some of the nuances of how e-commerce is impacting retail and how we should be thinking about it. And so that's kind of, what I've been doing for the last 3 years. Prior to that, you said I was at Burberry for 8 years and had a number of different roles there. Finished it off as VP of e-commerce at the end of my time there. And prior to that, I was at Topshop for a little bit and then Agent Procateur, which is where I started my e-commerce career. Back in the early 2000s.
No, that's interesting. So maybe you could step back. We have a pretty varied audience who listens to the podcast. Maybe it would be a good idea just to spend some time explaining what private equity is, how it works. Maybe just go through the business model.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, we're reasonably, typical private equity firm, perhaps somewhat on the smaller side. We will, and as I said, very focused on consumer. And when the firm was set up a number of years ago by Lyndon Lee and Robert Durant, their focus, they saw this niche, they saw this opportunity to really build a portfolio of businesses that focused on consumer. Typically, PE looks at investment opportunities across, typically all sectors. And NP is not venture capital. It's businesses and organizations that are somewhat more developed than that, where we see that there's an opportunity that they're somewhat at a bigger scale than VC. So we're not Series A, B, or startups. We're typically privately owned or private equity owned organizations around. We look typically at businesses around 150 to 500 million dollars in turnover. And we would look to invest in those organizations with our fund, which is typically funds that are raised through LPs, to pension funds and those types of entities. And we will invest their money across a portfolio of consumer brands and hope to realize a return on that investment over a 5 to 7 year period. So typically our ownership is 5 to 7 years, and we'll have multiple funds, one after the other. We're currently in we have our third fund, which is closed now, and we have a number of brands in there which we will be considering exiting at some stage. And we're actually in our fourth fund now, which we raised recently, where we are distributing capital at the moment. We've made 2 acquisitions in that fourth fund, 2 in the US. 4 acquisitions, 2 in the US and 2 in Europe. The 2 in the US that we've done recently are Lenny Larry's, which is a protein cookie bar, and Page Denim, as I said, which is a Californian lifestyle brand. And in the UK, we've also invested in a brand called Grenade, again, which is a protein bar. We're very interested in that space and in wellness generally, and a chain of bars in the UK. We have a track record in the hospitality industry. At one point we owned and exited successfully Wagamama's in a previous fund.
And are you typically looking for a minority or a majority investment when you're looking at brands that you like?
We prefer majorities, and like I said, we are on the smaller side of PE. I mean, we're still significant in terms of capital that we can deploy, but it really means that we have to be really smart and clever about how we approach new businesses and potential acquisitions. We are not going to do 50 acquisitions in a fund. We'll do 6 or 7. So we want to make sure that each one of those presents a return and is successful. And we, somewhat unlike some other PE firms, or I think it's changing, we're pretty hands-on. So we, and hence my role, we will look to partner with our brands closely and support them from an operating perspective as much as we possibly can, particularly around digital and certain other facets of the business. And so, we like to have a majority where we can, really affect change. That's not to say that we don't consider minorities. We have a minority in Actonani, which is very successful and we're very pleased with, and we're very excited about that. And we have a minority in ABG, which has obviously a host of brands within it, and again, a hugely exciting proposition.
So thanks, Jeremy. So just to summarize for the layperson, let me see if I got this right. You go to pension funds and other folks with money. You build a fund. You buy typically majority stakes in consumer-facing businesses. You make investments in those businesses with a look to exit a few years after acquiring the business. Pretty fair assessment of the business model?
I think you got it spot on. You all you need to know, pretty much. I'm sure that's so. And for the record, I'm a digital guy, right? From my experiences in retail, I work with a lot of very smart guys on the deal side here who, would say that is part correct. I mean, there's a huge financing aspect to this, which I wouldn't start to try to explain to anyone in a live environment.
It sounds like it's such a simple business model. If you have any job openings ever, maybe I'm done with Commerce Tools. Let me know.
Someone buys like out in LA.
We still have a journey to go, Kelly. So before you look for opportunities, there's also some stuff that we need to do here.
For sure. But it sounds interesting. So, one of the ways that PE firms improve operating margins is by centralizing functions, right? And we see this everywhere, right? 3G Capital, for example, is famous for buying up a lot of the CPGs out there. And they centralize a lot of IT functions. But at the same time, you also want to be able to sell the business at some point, right? So how do you balance that, that tendency? I'm sure there's a strong desire there to just build one commerce platform for all of the brands and white label it, versus giving each of the brands their own separate platform. Where do you draw the line between centralization and decentralization so that eventually you could sell the business off?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and one that we think about a lot. Again, we typically haven't done a huge amount of really define centralization in terms of our organization. Clearly, we do a lot of it around across the portfolio, whether that is looking at how we identify properties, physical properties, or the supply chain. We have a series of what I would call preferred partners and strategic partners, where we can leverage the synergies across the portfolio and the scale that generates. As I said, as we think about digital, it's relatively new for us, and I've been here 3 years. And I'd really say it's only the last 2 years where we've really managed to answer some of these questions and identify some areas where we believe that there's opportunities from a technology perspective when it comes to e-commerce and digital marketing. And I think that it can be a little bit difficult when you've got different brands at different stages of their life cycle and in different funds in our portfolio. If I take, we have John Varvatos on the one hand, that is very late in our ownership, and when we inherited it, had made a lot of the decisions around its technology platform, and so we've been looking to evolve that, but at the same time, we have to be sensitive to the sort of where they are and the duration and what we can do for them on contracts and whatnot. So it's something that we're now looking at pretty closely, and we're considering how we might, really deploy these strategic partners in a way that is perhaps more than sort of a virtual network of organizations. So, part of what I'm trying to do today, as we look at our e-commerce and our general digital environment, is identify partners where perhaps we can, we can begin to do that. And it's part of the discussion that I'm having with your team and with people around you and indeed in terms of the sort of the content management aspect of it. That I really see that there's opportunity to get these economies of scale, and also just to ensure that we are, having consistency in how we consider technology and consistency at a high level. I've experienced in the past, and remember particularly the businesses that we acquire are, small, mid-sized businesses, and often coming out of a wholesale environment, so often quite underdeveloped, both in terms of existing technology and existing capability, and I mean that across the whole spectrum of technology. And so we have to assess that carefully, and we have to consider what that should look like over a 5 to 7 year period. And I think we're in a much better place to begin to explore what that looks like now from a technology perspective. We're also doing it from a data perspective, trying to ensure that we can really get them focused on this key aspect of their entire business and try to understand how they should be approaching data. So there's 3 areas that I look at: it's data, technology, and then marketing. And then marketing, particularly content development and production, and how we can support our brands across those 3 aspects of their direct consumer organized business.
What are the challenges that you see that fashion brands today have when it comes to digital commerce? And probably what has also changed when you look back to the last 5 or 10 years? So you had been a long time in that industry, and it has changed a couple of times. So is anything different now in 2018 that was easier, or maybe easier in 2008, and now brands have different kind of challenges where also you can help them to solve them?
It's night and day, isn't it? I mean, maybe the story helps explain that. When I started at Burberry, and I forget exactly when that was, but let's call it 2000, maybe 2006. I joined literally the day or the week that Anja Arons joined, who really transformed that organization. But when I joined, and I joined to run European e-commerce, there was a team of 3 people, and I had a small office which was under the stairs, which the toilet leaked through, and it was kind of this crazy mezzanine floor which nobody knew existed, and nobody kind of they didn't even know what e-commerce was. So e-commerce, just particularly for luxury, and which is where my background was at the time, was not even a consideration back then. And if you fast forward to now, you look at brands, obviously Burberry, has excelled there, but Gucci has really turned around the way that they approach digital. LVMH is really looking at every single brand is now looking to employ leadership in technology and digital technology, which is really at that executive level. So I think just the awareness of the importance of e-commerce and digital technology generally, and in that luxury space, where it has changed incredibly. I mean, I think the other thing to note is that it's very different at that luxury enterprise level, as compared to really where we operate today, which is that sort of mid-sized, mid-market level, where the recognition that this is very important is there. And as I said, a lot of these brands are coming out of their beauty. Either they're trying to figure out direct consumer because typically their business model has been through a distribution network or through Sephora or the wholesale retail environment, or a lot of other apparel or jewelry brands where it has typically been through wholesale or retail. These brands have not had a developed direct consumer aspect to their business, and that's beyond e-commerce is very telling, because they really have had to adapt and begin to think about what they're communicating, how they're communicating to their customer, that their customer is so directly connected with their brand. And that is a massive, massive change for these organizations. And I think that, for me, that last bit, I think the beginning, in the early days of Burberry, was everyone was kind of like waking up and realizing that this was important. We saw the expansion of internet penetration. We saw the growth of e-commerce. We saw the emergence of the millennial consumer, and we saw that explosion of mobile. And for luxury, then of course China became a significant aspect of all of our businesses. And I think that was the early part of sort of that was running up to sort of 2010. And I think beyond that, now 2010, we're now looking at, well, we all understand that this is all important. Some people were early to that, Burberry was early to that, and some people were late to that. We're now in that. We're all in there now. But the challenge we all face now is how do we actually keep pace with that? I mean, all these different channels are now emerging. I'm not talking about future channels, I'm talking about existing channels. How are we creating enough content to meet our customers' expectations? How are we telling the story of the brand in a way that people care about? How are we presenting product in a way that isn't just here's all our product, which is what we did before, but here's product that's right for you. So we've all woken up, and now we're trying to finesse how we do things, and almost this is more difficult than the actual waking up was.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, what's interesting is we see a commoditization out there a lot of products, right? And the concept of a brand itself is kind of eroding away as a lot of these e-commerce vendors, and I guess specifically I'm talking about Amazon here, they're building their own private label. So how do you tell the story, right? Because that's what the value of a brand ultimately is, right? It's building an emotional one-to-one relationship with a customer. How do you tell that story? How do you connect with customers besides publishing content to all of the different channels that they're on?
Well, I think you nailed it. Whether it's Amazon, in fact, you've included that Walmart these days. Approaching it slightly differently, but you've got this mass commoditization of products, and it's not only that, but these guys are taking to the next level the whole aspect of fulfillment and distribution. You can't compete with these guys on price and convenience, and they're creating their own for the economies as private labels. So I think everybody, it's a very well trodden road, the concern and fear that everybody has of Amazon. But I would add to that for my brand particularly, where again I say to reiterate, we're right in the middle there. I think there's a lot of these brands, hopefully not mine, but sure some of mine and certainly a lot of others, but we're in sort of mortal jeopardy here, I would say, because not only have we got this downward pressure from these giants that are you're just not going to compete with in terms of price and convenience and this commoditization that is going on, but you've also got these emergence of these very nimble digitally native brands that are very focused on specific products and are very, very good at connecting with their customer. Because it's very specific and because they are all born natively digitally, they know how to optimize these channels, and they know how to develop a narrative and tell a story and create a visual representation of a brand that is, that people relate to and care about. And I try to encourage everybody to look at that, to try to understand these guys, how do these guys really develop this close connection with the consumer, I mean, look, they've got some advantages, right? It's a lot more simple. They haven't got an extensive brick and mortar real estate to try to understand. They're very targeted in where they're allocating their budget. They're very adept at marketing. But we need to learn from these guys, I think. So it comes down to, understanding your brand, beginning to find the narrative within that consumers are and people are going to care about, and it's finding out the right way to tell that across particularly social channels, utilizing influencers, but all channels, and leveraging the opportunities that you have already. So for us, our stores, and thinking about how omnichannel works, so we can actually deliver an experience to the customer. But it's very difficult for these brands in the middle to adapt and transform their businesses fast enough to understand, to move away from this sort of campaign, sort of amplification aspect, marketing strategy, towards more of a sort of a grassroots, one-to-one, connection with individual customers. So, develop the story, build data into, become a data-first organization, and try to adopt this approach to software, which is much more, try to become much more equipped around developing software and experiences, rather than just, going down the route that everyone's gone down before, which is, go to one of these traditional e-commerce platforms and hope that it's all going to be okay. You've got to have a lot more of an understanding around these aspects of your business now, and you've got to pivot from the traditional to sort of become a bit more of a digitally native organization.
So I understand that building the direct connection to the customer is super important, and also that you need to build digital knowledge and experience within the company, and to expand that. But to some degree, also you want to achieve top line growth, and I think there's probably no way just to bypass these large platforms and marketplaces. So, for example, like ASOS and Zalando, and to some degree also Amazon and so on. How do you leverage it? What is at the end more important? Maybe not to grow the brand, but to grow the revenue. Is it the direct online sales, or is it participating in these marketplaces and platforms?
I think it depends on the brand, and I don't think that you can. I'm not one of these guys who's going to say that you should not go on Amazon, and you should not engage with these marketplaces, because I think that's foolish. You have to, and it's not easy, but you have to, develop close strategic relationships with these marketplaces and platforms, so that you can, to the best of your ability, try to control your brand and the way that it's represented, and work with them, on the product and the collections that you present there, so that you have one, you've got to have a clear strategy there, but you've also got to have a clear strategy for your direct business. And I think the importance of the website, or the mobile site, is not to be underestimated. It is really the hub, and you have to develop experiences, and you have to develop even product and collections that you really retain some exclusiveness around, so that you don't become entirely dependent on these platforms, so they can disintermediate you highly. I think you've got to have a clear balance. At All Saints, we've been very, very focused on this, and developed some very close relationships with Amazon, and have been very successful there. In some beauty brands, at Burberry, we were one of the first brands on Amazon Beauty, and we went on there purely so that we could really clean up the rest of the environment, so that there was no point not being on there. We were on there, we just weren't controlling what we were looking like on there. So we took a little bit of control of that, and we did the same at Tmall as well in China. So I'm a proponent of working closely with these marketplaces to scale. I think you need to, better the enemy that you know, right? But you need to think about your product and your selection and your buy, and see how you can make sure that you still retain something within your own environment that customers care about, both product and story. And so I think that's very important. I mean, the other problem that we've all faced in retail over the last few years is this race to the bottom in terms of promotions and discounting. And I think somewhat that's been a symptom of this explosion of these marketplaces, particularly in the beauty environment, where you're lucky to get the customer to come and buy from you first at full price, but you're pretty sure that if they like something, they're going to find it through one of these other channels at a discount. So it's become very, very difficult as brands have become so widely dispersed across so many different platforms to actually maintain a full price strategy. And I think that's something that we are all now really focused on, both in terms of our relationships with our wholesale partners, the traditional ones, but also in terms of the digital marketplaces that emerge. But again, to reiterate, we've had very strong relationships with Amazon. We work very closely with Farfetch, who I think is another incredible organization. We work very closely in China with a number of platforms out there. So I'm an advocate of these platforms, and I think they're essential to growth. Not only from we used to talk to them about the 3 R's, which is reach, reputation, and revenue. And I think you need to consider it in that way to leverage each of those strategically to see how you can grow your business.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So, there's been a lot of discussion out there about this retail apocalypse, right? And hysterical articles, in I think well-meaning publications are saying retail's dead. Right? There's a lot of hysteria out there. And Casey Lobach kind of came up with some great research. He heads up Deloitte's retail practice, and he published this nice report earlier this year. And he basically made the argument and substantiated it, which was great, that retail is just bifurcating, right? So there's a low end of retail, and you see a lot of dollar stores and things like that, and that's doing really, really well. And then at the very top end, very, very top end, they're doing really well too. And he was saying that a lot of stores like the JCPenney's and Bon-Tons and Yonkers of the world are kind of stuck in that middle. And your brands are all over the board. I think they start more in the mid-tier and they go all the way up. Do you have a strategy to take some brands down and some brands up? Or from a branding standpoint, how do you, where do you fit, and what's your general strategy on that?
Well, I would certainly agree that retail is not dead. I think retail has had a rough ride over the past few years. It's certainly not been easy, and I think the retail environment is undoubtedly changing rapidly. And I agree with that bifurcation as well. We think about that a lot, and again, I don't think there's a single strategy that we have across our portfolio. As you rightly point out, it's very broad. I think that the nature of our organization and the types of brands that we invest very specifically in brands that are brands and that have a certain positioning, and typically that has been when it comes to luxury, to fashion and apparel, much more at the premium to high end. That's now, we do have in Italy, we have a brand which is much more on sort of the affordable entry price, and it's doing very well. So we try to maintain that. We try to maintain that level. So All Saints, it's certainly a brand that in the US particularly is very premium, as is Page, and we see that there's a lot of opportunity now out there. We do have Buscemi, which is a super high end sneaker brand, and I would say generally that's difficult. So I think if we wouldn't go, into luxury, probably again lightly, because I think it's very hard to break into that market unless you have significant scale, because these labels have got to compete But I think there's that high-end premium that it's probably a little bit more insulated from a lot of the commoditization that's going on. And as I said, we like brands, so we like to develop brands. We like founders of brands that have stories that people care about, and so that typically lends itself to that slightly higher end premium level. We don't have strategies to really go down into sort of the lower price point too much in that part of our business. But guys, I wouldn't say we have a particular strategy on there. We look at it on a brand basis, and see really where the opportunity is in that sector and that vertical.
When you look up for new brands that you like to invest into, what are the criteria that you're looking for when it comes to organization, retail stores, brand positioning, digital capabilities, and so on?
I think at the high level, there's sort of three things that we look at. We look to see if there's a brand, and again, that's very important for us. We want to see that there's sort of a heritage and history, a story that can be told, and often that comes with founders who are still very much involved in the organization, and we find that's something that we gravitate to. Then, sort of as we look at how we would grow that business, we typically look at, of course, how we can improve the operating efficiencies in them. So often these brands have grown very fast, and they have either underdeveloped teams, and I point specifically to technology and e-commerce and digital, or they just continue to really not be efficient in how they're operating. That's whether that's a capability thing or just an ability not to be able to scale efficiently through the supply chain or through looking at deal making withdrawals or whatever that might be. So that's one. Then importantly, we look at how we could extend the product range. So that's something that we look at. And that takes 2 forms, either into new categories. So we look at All Saints again. We've taken them into leather goods, or we see significant opportunities to move much more beyond denim into much more of a sort of a full lifestyle offering. Or Buscemi, we looked at moving them into women's shoes and then into non-apparel. So we're looking at how we can extend the brands, and then we look at that extension, how we can extend that globally and internationally. We, because we have one foot in the US, one foot in Europe, we're very experienced in both of those markets. So we would look to acquire US brands that really have an opportunity to extend into Europe, and we would help them do that. So really those are sort of the key aspects that we look at.
I've maybe one little unfair follow-up question on that, just to dive in there. So let's say you invested into one of these companies, and as SVP Digital, you are responsible to support them on their e-commerce strategy, on technical decisions, and so on. What happens if one of these brands has a complete opposite opinion on their digital commerce strategy than you have? Let's say you say, okay, we need to hire more insource more technical talent, understand our customers better, and so on. And they say, no, we like to outsource all these kind of things. We are not really focusing on that. How do you get forward and get to a joint path?
Well, Doug, I think your unfair questions are very, very insightful questions. And you sort of nicely summarize some of the challenges of being in PE. I think there's a couple of things that help. One, that this idea of being a majority rather than a minority. If as a majority owner, then we have certainly a lot more influence. But I would then go on to say that I remember sitting down with a PE guy in New York who worked at one of the big banks, and he gave me a piece of advice. He turned around to me and we had a long conversation. He turned around to me and he just said, Jeremy, one piece of advice I can give you is don't be a seagull. And I looked at him and go, what do you mean don't be a seagull? That doesn't make any sense at all. He's a very smart guy and he said, don't be a seagull, of course not a seagull. And he said, what I mean by that is you don't fly in, shit all over everybody and fly out again. So what I've learned, and I think where my skill sets lie, is coming from this retail background and understanding the challenges that these guys face, That's important. Secondly, is I've developed through Burberry not only an understanding of whether it's technology or digital marketing or fulfillment or customer service. I've got a very broad experience, but also how to communicate at whether it's executive level or down in the trenches, and really develop relationships. And that's very important. Now, that is not to say that there are not occasions where we have different opinions, or indeed that the firm will really shut down and say, no, we're going to do it this way. And in those instances, we'll make a call. We'll try not to exert our influence in a sort of sledgehammer way, and respect the leadership of the brand. And again, it depends on the caliber of that leadership and the extent of their experience. And if they have that, and indeed part of my job is to build those teams. So at that point, if I build a team and they have a thing and they want to go a different direction, we'll have that discussion. And I would support that if that's the right thing to do. So we are not a dictatorship. I mean, we are where we need to be, but we try to really build teams so that they can be self-sufficient, make the right decisions themselves, and so then when we come, they're much more attractive as an asset when we come to sell. So as much as I'd like to say, if they don't agree with me, then I can go and sack everyone and put my own people in there. It doesn't quite work like that. We are.
Fair enough.
Although that has happened, but we won't.
I have one more question, and I think we're getting to the end of the show here, and it's more of a technology question. I know you try to give each brand some autonomy and freedom, which is great, but do you have any mandates in terms of principles, right? So do you require each brand to be cloud first, for example? Do you require them to do microservices? Do you require them to use a digital experience platform? Are there any mandates on not necessarily the specific product, but on the principles of development going forward?
Yeah, I think that is a key focus of what I'm doing at the moment. As I said, it's harder when you inherit brands and there's a lot of legacy in there. And there's a lot of transformation work that has to happen, and you have to make decisions based on, you have to play the cards you're dealt, really. But as you look at, and we're in Fund 4, that says as we approach this fund, and we look at the recent acquisitions and we look at potential future acquisitions, that is very much in our view. And so yes, you set me up nicely for that. Everything needs to be. I'd like everything to be cloud first, right, as much as we possibly can, and move everybody towards that, those environments. I'm a very, very big believer in having much more control over the front end. So, introducing content management systems. This is a long conversation, maybe for another time, but if I look at these traditional e-commerce platforms, I've become, whether it's at enterprise level or more the mid-market, so whether it's APG or Demandware or Magento, having worked across all of those, there's aspects of those that are very good, but there's aspects of those that frustrate me. And as I think about our portfolio, I would, I need to give my marketing teams and my front-end teams much more control over that experience. That shouldn't take a long time to do, and it shouldn't be expensive to do, and it shouldn't take development to do. So, I don't think e-commerce businesses have really understood the benefits and the opportunities that exist there. I had a meeting just the other day about it, and we were looking at some front-end designs, and I was sitting with the team, and we were scrutinizing front-end designs and where each image and where block of text and piece of navigation were going to go. And I turned around to them and said, guys, we actually don't need to even do this. Let's just think about the individual components of blocks of content. Let's design a ton of those, and then you can design the page however you want on any given day. And that's a really different way of thinking about that front-end experience. So that's very, very important for me. And that's why I think some of the recent, we look at Page and the technology that we're putting in there is very much the benchmark of how I want to push our brand forward. And that is, on the front end, we're using Bloomreach, which, is recently quite Hippo. So on that content management side, we also have a lot of machine learning in terms of the merchandising, so that we don't, again, have to build the teams that I used to have at Burberry, where I'd have 15, 20 on digital merchandisers who are constantly changing where pictures showed on the screen based on product images, based on color or how we felt it should be. Now, I think there should be a combination of that, but why can't machine do all of that? But certainly for all the categories and the product cases that people don't really need to look at and care about every single day, or maybe at the bottom of the page or at the top of the page, I don't need a team of 50. Maybe I need a team of 1. Maybe I need a team of 2. And then on the back end, again, I can't sit in a meeting, and I don't want my digital leads to sit in meetings with at board level with CMOs and CEOs who perhaps aren't as digitally native as we all are, and they sit there and they'll look at a roadmap and there'll be 5 things in there, and they say, well, why can't I do this, this, and this? And it's a good question. Right? We shouldn't take us 3 months to implement PayPal. It shouldn't take us 3 months to produce a new homepage template. Or it shouldn't. We that's just archaic, right? And I think we're just stuck in that way of thinking, and it's time to get out of that. So, I think whether it's working with, putting in microservices and a headless platform on the back end so that I can swap in and out, cool web services relatively easily, which is what I should be doing, rather than being stuck in a modern platform. Yes, that is actually something that I would, expect all of my future brands to move towards. And again, on the front end, to give a lot more flexibility on the front end. Yeah, absolutely, that's what I'd expect for them to be doing. So yes, we are going to begin to mandate that people begin to think a little bit more creatively about how they deploy technology. But to do that, we also need to, really transform the organization's capability within IT and in e-commerce and digital marketing. And that's the hard thing. You said it early on. I mean, private equity is about the bottom line. We're about turning profit and multiples of that so that we can see an exit within a time frame. That doesn't lend itself well to a lot of upfront investment. We like to do small investments, see a return on that, see if we can build on that. And that's really our approach. So that's the challenge and the tension and friction that I deal with every day. But I believe firmly that we need to evolve our capabilities in these areas if we are going to compete, if we're going to be able to give our customers the experiences that they want. Whether that's in store or online, that is what we have to do. Technology has to be at the heart of all of that. Has to stop being an expense. Has to start being strategic. And we have to become much more proficient in that. And we have to be talking, people like you have to help us to do that.
Yeah, I very much agree with you, and I'm glad that you're pushing that onto the different businesses that you own. And I guess that's where it's probably helpful to have majority ownership. So certainly makes things easier. Sometimes.
It's not. My job is not an easy job, and you've covered a lot of the challenges that we have. But it's a great job, and I'm blessed every single day that I come to work, and I get to work across such a broad range of brands, and I have an opportunity to think about these problems, and it just takes some time. I get frustrated. I want to do everything immediately, but it takes time, and you meet really interesting people along the way, and develop strategic relationships to help do that. And that's the future. It's really about partnership and understanding how together we can build.
Yeah. I think with that, we are out of time. So thanks again, Jeremy. It's been a great discussion, and I wish you continued success.
Thank you very much, Jack. It's a pleasure to speak to you as always.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.